One of the amazing things about this crisis, for me, that makes it really bizarre, is with the Muslim Brotherhood, you're dealing with a group that has made no secret of its intentions. Remember, Marx said the communists disdain to conceal their aims. So, I mean, everything they've written, every speech made by them, they proclaimed their goal is Islamism, a Sharia state, hatred of the Jews, hatred of America. Then suddenly, you got hundreds of people writing articles about the Muslim Brotherhood. You say, it's moderate. There's not radical. And they cite no evidence. About a year and a half ago, I may have the date wrong, they put out a platform they called for a Sharia state. Last October 7th, this is like the bizarre experiences when you have studying the Middle East. Last October 7th, I wrote an article entitled, The Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood has declared jihad on America. Will America notice? And at the time, and friends of mine said, nobody picked it up. Nobody to this day, I mean, it was a lot of internet places, has cited it. With a couple of exceptions now, nobody in major newspapers wanted to interview me, despite the fact that I've worked on this issue for over 30 years. And yet I have to read hundreds of articles that say, oh yeah, this is a moderate group. And it's just so, the failure to deal with reality is so bizarre. And then several times a day, I have intelligent friends send me emails saying, well, I talked to this person, Egyptian or Pakistan, and they say, oh, no, they don't really want Islamism, they don't really mean it. And how can one explain that you can joke about the blindness or naivete of the West, but how can you explain that it's reached such lengths when people openly say, we hate you, we want to destroy you, we want to fight you, and not listen to them? I mean, this is after September 11th. It's the most amazing thing I feel I've seen politically in my entire life. And I have explanations, but I can't explain it. Now, the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood people aren't stupid. I think that the wealthy sophisticates, the kinds of people that journalists usually hang out with in Egypt, look at them the way that a wealthy Massachusetts or San Francisco liberal would look at the Tea Party. Oh, these are really stupid people. These are peasants. They don't know anything. But actually, they're more politically sophisticated than they are. They have discipline. They know what they want. And they know a lot about strategy and tactics. The Brotherhood was founded in 1928. By the mid-30s, it was being subsidized by Nazi Germany. Incidentally, if I may mention, I'm now finishing a book called Germany, the Nazis, and the Making of the Modern Middle East. We have hundreds of pages of new material from the CIA and other places, and tells the story in great detail. And there's some things that really amaze and shock people. The connections are far bigger than I ever realized. And they supported the Germans. They were ready to turn Egypt over to the Germans if Rommel advanced, but he didn't. And then they helped the Mufti after the war and fought against Israel in 1948. And then came their great opportunity and their great trauma, which was the Free Officers' coup of July 1952. And what happened was they were very big and they were very powerful. They had a terrorist wing. They assassinated the Egyptian prime minister, and the founder of the Brotherhood was assassinated. And then they went too far. They tried to assassinate Nasser, who's Mubarak's predecessor before Sadat, and they cracked down hard on them. They smacked the regime, the military regime, which saw itself as an Arab socialist, Arab nationalist regime. They arrested the leadership and middle cadre. They threw them in the concentration camps. They tortured them. I mean, people talk about Mubarak's repression. I mean, absolutely nothing compared to what Nasser did, which nobody in the West ever criticized. And they hung some of them. And for a period of about almost almost 20 years, they were really hounded and repressed. This is, of course, before Mubarak had anything to do with politics. And then Sadat in the early 70s, for reasons I can go into if you want, basically allowed them to start operating again. Now, they had learned the lesson. You have to be very cautious, very careful, or you will be repressed. And so when useful idiots say, well, they're not involved with violence. They're not involved with violence because they knew what would happen to them, that the regime would just leap on them and they would go back to those concentration camps. So they always avoided trying to overthrow the regime. But they were involved in violence and terrorism outside of Egypt, and sometimes assassinations within Egypt. So if we come down to today, these are people who, many in the leadership have been around for 40 years. They are cautious and careful, and they do not push themselves to the forefront. They only took 15% of the seats on the directorate of the revolution. They will not, even if they're made legal, they will not run on their own ticket. They will use a front man, and his name is Mohammed al-Baradei. And they're not going to declare an Islamic State within the first 6 months. Now, this subtlety, this strategic and tactical flexibility are mistaken for moderation, when actually it's just smart politics. If you want to compare them to communists, although it's not perfect, it's a very useful analogy. They can run in elections, they could serve in governments, but the goal of seizing state power is always there. Step by step, infiltrating institutions and so on. In addition, the idea that there's this like hip middle class and these, these Muslim Brothers clowns, again, literally nobody in any mass American newspaper or with possible exception, television station, has pointed out that the Brotherhood just happens to control the National Organization of Medical Doctors and the National Organization of Lawyers in Egypt. So maybe all these people aren't so stupid. Remember that John Brennan, who's President Obama's counterterrorism advisor, said that, I'm not exaggerating, that Hezbollah couldn't be terrorists, and one of the reasons they aren't terrorists is because they have lawyers in their ranks. And this is the point we've reached. So that's really the point of the Brotherhood. Now, the Brotherhood is an international organization. It has established itself in North America. It's established itself in Europe. But the most important, and of course, the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood, for all practical purposes, became Hamas. And the other most powerful Brotherhood organization is in Jordan. So my point is that if the Brotherhood gets a significant share of power, even in a coalition with Mohammed al-Baradei, something like that, they're going to see those two as their allies who they will help. They will help Hamas against Israel and against the Palestinian Authority, and they will help the Jordanian Brotherhood against the Jordanian regime to try to overthrow that regime. This is exceptionally dangerous. It is the most dangerous crisis that the U.S. has faced since the Iranian Revolution. It may be a crisis that the U.S. is saved from, but it will not be to the credit of the Obama administration. More millions of people have died from happy revolutions than from any other political event in the last century. The Russian Revolution, well, if we go back to the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, could include Germany, but I don't want to get into that. And, of course, the Iranian Revolution. I lived through the Iranian Revolution. I covered those events, and I remember vividly that people were saying the same things as they were saying now. President Jimmy Carter called in Iranian experts, American experts on Iran. I know their names, I'm not going to say them, in the fall of 1978, and they said, there's nothing to worry about. The moderate reformers will win. Islamists can't rule. a country, Ayatollah Khomeini, ha 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 ha. So I've seen these people be wrong again and again. And of course, they're wrong about almost everything about the Middle East. They were wrong about the 1990s peace process, too. But the revolution I picked out as especially interesting is one that most people outside of the experts don't remember anymore, which is the Turkish Revolution of 1907. There was a modern, and that actually had more advantages in this. It was a modernizing revolution by a group of military officers who wanted to make the Ottoman Empire powerful and rich. So 1907, I'm simplifying a bit, they took over the empire, and I'm reading accounts, and people are writing, everybody's joyous, they're out in the streets, the old tyranny is gone. The Muslims march to the Armenian and Greek headquarters and say, we're all brothers, we love each other, and everybody loves each other, and the Armenians and Greeks said, now we're all going to be citizens of the Ottoman Empire. Well, within 10 years of that day, the Armenians had mostly been murdered. Actually, the Greeks, it took a little longer, say 15 years. The Greeks were almost all gone. 20% of the population had died, the entire population. The empire fell apart, lost most of its territory because they got involved in World War I. So, if you had been there then to say, wait a minute, this could go wrong, then people would ridicule. But this has been our historical experience over and over again. So I just got a note from an Egyptian, well, the American Revolution, went well. But you have to have a basis for it. Now, I am a strong supporter of liberal reform movements in the Arab world. I've written a book about it. I know many of these people, and I want to be on their side. I think that Tunisia may well succeed, but this is not what we're seeing in Egypt. And by the way, I could list 6 or 7 or 8 lies that we have been told by media and by the public debate, which have absolutely no basis in fact. And I can take them apart in like 1 to 2 minutes each. One of them is that this revolution is made by young, hip Facebook types. Okay, so the question is, and the 90 million people in Egypt, how many of them are young, hip Facebook types? First of all, you're only going to find these people in Cairo, which has, don't hold me on this, 14 out of 90 million? I have to consult the numbers. These tend to be upper middle class youths who are relatively privileged, relatively well off. They've gone through universities. They are somewhat fluent in a foreign language. So the proportion of these people is small. If they can turn out, let's say, regularly 100,000 people at a demonstration, how many of them come from this group? Let's say 30,000. But that's it. You got 30,000 of these people. Now, by coincidence, while I was writing about these things, somebody applied to join my Facebook group, a young Egyptian from Cairo, supporter of the revolution, and he had on his page all these Western women singers who were dressed the way Western women singers are, who he admired. Under political, so he's your, example. So who are his political heroes? Malcolm X, a famous Iranian Islamist, and Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb is the most nasty Muslim Brotherhood ideologue. And he had a personal statement. Excuse me. In the personal statement, I'll paraphrase it, he said, being an Egyptian isn't important. Being an Arab is important. It's not important what tribe or family you belong to. The only important root of identity is Islam, and Egypt should be a Sharia state. And to prove that he was not the kind of Muslim that I call a conservative traditionalist Muslim, he ended with a quote from Syed Qutb. This guy is a hardline Islamist, Facebook hip, etc. So, the woman who started this, we don't know anything about her. Imagine all these reporters are running around and nobody's written an article yet about the April 6th movement. What is it? Who are these people? It might be interesting to know. But she's wearing an Iranian-style chador. Now, to be very fair, just be a traditionalist. But I'd like to know. I'd like to know more. So that's one. The second one is the Muslim Brotherhood is moderate. A third one is the Muslim Brotherhood is weak, which is ridiculous. People report from Alexandria that Muslim Brotherhood people are the only ones on the street. Egypt is full of villages that don't have too many young hip Facebook types living in those villages. Another myth, which was quickly proved to be a lie, is the Brotherhood wasn't interested in abrogating the peace treaty with Israel. Then the deputy head said they were. I mean, it's just one thing after another. I don't think there has ever been such a wide gap between reality and what has been reported in any story I have ever seen. And then you have articles like the one in the New York Times Sunday magazine. I went and hung out with these Muslim Brotherhood people. They're great guys. Hey, I mean, did the Iranian Revolution happen? And also, there is this amazing misunderstanding of the history of the Middle East in the last 30 years. And Turkey has moved into the other camp. Iran, you already have. Lebanon is now ruled by Hezbollah. Syria is in the other camp. Gaza is run by Hamas. I mean, is there a pattern here? The pattern here is that the West appears to be weak and in retreat, and the Islamists appear to be strong and in advance. People don't feel it's necessary to engage on this, that the West is losing, it's perceived as losing, it's in retreat, it's weak, and it's bad enough to face a dangerous threat. But when you face a dangerous threat that you don't even acknowledge exists, the danger is much greater. Now, for me, the most interesting single statement in this whole thing was one made by Hosni Mubarak, when he said, President Obama does not understand Egyptian culture. And I thought a lot, what did he mean by that? And I conclude, and I feel very convinced of this, that what he meant was this, my words, not his. In the West, when you compromise and you make concessions, people say, you're nice, I like you, you obviously have good intentions, so I'll compromise and make concessions, and we'll have a win-win deal. That's not the way things work in the Middle East. Concessions are interpreted as weakness, and the other side pushes harder and becomes more radical. So after the first 72 hours of demonstrations, if you announce, this regime must go, it must go now, it must go yesterday, then the signal that sends is that the regime, not just Mubarak, the regime is finished, that power is in the streets, and you can now disregard the United States as a factor. There is little comprehension in Washington of how what it does is perceived in the rest of the world, and especially in the Middle East, and people don't seem to be interested in listening. They do not see, they don't feel that they have to respond to evidence except with abuse and insults and ridiculous arguments which can be torn apart in a few minutes. So the Brotherhood is moderate because they didn't engage in terrorism. Well, they didn't engage in terrorism because they were afraid of being squashed. And they did support terrorism, and not only against Israel, but also were very vocal in supporting terrorism against Americans in Iraq. And they were involved in inciting assassinations within Egypt. Certainly the Farag Fouda case, a famous secularist who was murdered, and the attempted murder of Naguib Mahfouz, who was the first Arab to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. So why do we have to whitewash these? The first article I wrote is, I'm really worried because other people aren't. If people had said, this is a dangerous situation, we realize the Brotherhood is a threat, we have to proceed cautiously. Of course, we want to support the change in democracy, but we're really got to be careful and cautious and smart about it, then I wouldn't have been so upset and passionate about this. But when you see everything, what could possibly go wrong? It's extraordinarily dangerous. You can never just look at the immediate events. You have to look at the balance of forces and how the society is organized and what people think. So, and an average person with no interest in foreign affairs, if they might not understand that, who can blame them? But when people who are, journalists charged with responsibility, who are leaders of countries, who are supposedly great experts, I mean, if they can't do it, then you're seriously in trouble. By the way, remember something very significant, still another point that people don't understand or bring up. In the communist countries, communist-ruled countries, they had a very big advantage. The moderate pro-democracy people had a very big advantage on their side. They had the two most potent weapons at their command. They weren't just going for democracy. They had nationalism and they had religion. They put together those three. In Poland, they had the Solidarity, had the Catholic Church, and they had Polish nationalism as against Russia. So they had these great tools. But in the Arab world, religion is on the other side and nationalism is on the other side. So they only are left with democracy, and that's much weaker, a much weaker base. But you see, none of these things are being discussed. It's just enthusiasm. Isn't it great? Isn't it wonderful? I mean, that's not how a political debate, a public debate, is conducted.